The air over South Vietnam hung heavy and wet, saturated with heat, fuel fumes, and the distant, ever-present thud of artillery echoing through the low hills. Near Da Nang, on a temporary airstrip carved from red earth and reinforced with pierced steel planking, a guarded perimeter had been established overnight. Sandbags, camouflage netting, and armed sentries surrounded something that, by all logic, should not have been there. A Chinese-built helicopter. Harbin Z-5. Colonel Thomas Jack Rourke stood a short distance away, boots planted in the mud, hands resting on his hips. He had learned long ago not to judge aircraft by first impressions. 22 years in Army aviation had stripped him of that habit. He had flown helicopters that looked immaculate and failed catastrophically, and others that looked barely airworthy, yet brought crews home again and again. Still, this one unsettled him. The Z-5 was already obsolete by the standards of the late 1960s. A license-built Chinese copy of the Soviet Mi-4, itself a design rooted firmly in the early Cold War. Large, bulbous, piston-engined, slow. Everything about it seemed wrong for a battlefield increasingly defined by jets, radar, surface-to-air missiles, and fast reaction forces. And yet, intelligence reports kept mentioning it. Night logistics flights, border crossings from Laos and southern China, insertions into valleys American planners considered inaccessible to aircraft of that size. Always the same description: a big helicopter, clumsy in silhouette, flying dangerously low, taking damage, and vanishing into jungle terrain where nothing that heavy should have survived. 3 nights earlier, it hadn't vanished. A coordinated interdiction patrol had intercepted it after a monsoon storm scattered navigation beacons across the region. Disoriented and flying blind, the helicopter set down hard on a crude jungle strip, its landing gear sinking into mud. The escort aircraft broke contact under fire. The Z-5 didn't burn. Its crew abandoned it and disappeared into the trees. By dawn, it was American property. Officially, the incident did not exist. Rourke had been summoned quietly, moved through channels that left no paper trail. The briefing was short, clinical. The final line stayed with him. "We don't want performance numbers. We want to understand why they still trust it." 2 soldiers pulled back the canvas tarp slowly, as if expecting the machine beneath to object. The helicopter emerged into the daylight, its faded olive paint scarred by years of service. Red stars had been hastily smeared with mud. Bullet holes peppered the fuselage. Some had been patched with sheet metal that didn't even match the original panels. It was ugly. The nose was blunt and utilitarian, more transport than combat aircraft. Thick, flat cockpit windows gave it a greenhouse appearance, designed for visibility, not elegance. Above, a towering rotor mast supported 5 massive blades, each bearing scars, nicks, and uneven repairs. The fixed landing gear looked almost primitive, but undeniably solid. One intelligence officer shook his head. "That thing belongs in a museum." Rourke said nothing. He circled the aircraft slowly. Oil stains marked the ground beneath the engine compartment. Rivets sat unevenly along the skin. Panels didn't quite align. Nothing about it suggested precision manufacturing, but nothing looked fragile either. At the tail boom, he stopped. A long crack had been welded over crudely, reinforced with a steel brace bolted straight through the structure. "They didn't replace the section," Rourke said quietly. "They just kept it flying." Inside the cockpit, the philosophy became unmistakable. Cyrillic and Chinese markings stenciled directly onto bare metal. Large analog gauges. Thick switches designed to be operated with gloved hands. No unnecessary systems. No insulation against vibration. The seats were thin, uncomfortable, and functional. There was no thick checklist binder waiting for him. Instead, a translated manual barely thicker than a field notebook. Start, lift, fly, land, repair. That was the entire concept. Rourke thought of the UH-1 Huey. Responsive, agile, designed around speed and air mobility under the assumption, sometimes false, that friendly control of the air existed. The Huey was a product of confidence. The Z-5 was a product of endurance. Its radial engine was large, inefficient, and thirsty, but simple enough to be repaired with basic tools. Control systems were mechanical and exposed, easy to inspect, easy to fix. Hydraulic lines were thick, redundant, and routed where mechanics could reach them without removing half the airframe. It was not designed to win the war. It was designed to survive it. That night, rain hammered the tin roof of the operations hut as Rourke sat alone under a dim bulb. He studied the translated intelligence summaries again. Reports of Z-5s returning with cylinders misfiring, flying with damaged rotor blades, absorbing small arms fire that would have forced American helicopters out of service. The conclusion felt uncomfortable. This helicopter did not rely on perfection. It relied on tolerance for failure. 3 days later, clearance arrived through secure channels. He would fly it, not as a test pilot chasing data points, but as an observer, stepping briefly into the logic of an enemy doctrine. As dawn broke over the jungle, Rourke looked again at the battered Z-5 resting in the mud. It was old. It was crude. And somehow, against every modern assumption, it was still here. Morning came without ceremony. Low clouds clung to the hills, and the airfield smelled of wet earth and aviation fuel. The Harbin Z-5 sat where it had the night before, unchanged, unimpressed by attention. Ground crews moved around it cautiously, as if unsure whether the machine belonged to this war or an older, more brutal one. Rourke climbed into the left seat with deliberate movements. The cockpit felt tight, not cramped but uncompromising. No soundproofing, no insulation from vibration or heat. Every surface was metal, cold in the morning, hot by noon. Honest. He strapped in and scanned the instrument panel. Airspeed, altimeter, oil pressure, cylinder head temperature. Nothing more than what was strictly necessary. The translated checklist rested on his knee, short enough to memorize. Battery on. Fuel valves open. Magnetos set. The radial engine came alive with a cough, then a deep, uneven roar. The entire airframe shuddered as if resisting being awakened. Unlike the turbine whine of a Huey, this was mechanical, animal. Pistons firing in sequence, metal asserting itself. The smell of oil seeped into the cockpit immediately. Rourke felt every vibration through the seat and cyclic. The helicopter was not trying to hide its effort. It wanted him to know what it was doing. He eased the collective upward. The rotor blades bit the air with a heavy, deliberate rhythm. The Z-5 did not leap. It rose slowly, almost reluctantly, as if weighing the decision to leave the ground. Mud fell from the landing gear in clumps. At 10 feet, Rourke held it steady. Control inputs were heavy, not sluggish, but demanding. The aircraft required commitment. You did not suggest a maneuver. You instructed it firmly. He transitioned forward, lifting into a shallow climb. The airspeed crept upward. The helicopter felt stable, solid, almost stubborn. There was none of the nervous responsiveness of a Huey. No lightness. No quick corrections. This machine assumed you would not be in a hurry. At 300 feet, Rourke leveled off and began a wide circuit over the airstrip. The engine noise was constant, unwavering. He watched the gauges carefully. Oil pressure steady. Temperatures high, but within tolerance. The helicopter vibrated continuously, but predictably. It dawned on him that this aircraft was not designed to be comfortable at any moment. It was designed to be acceptable at all moments. He pushed the nose down slightly, increasing speed. The Z-5 responded slowly, but once moving, it carried momentum like a freight truck. Turns required planning. Banking too sharply punished the pilot with heavy control forces and an immediate reminder of mass. In a Huey, you danced. In the Z-5, you marched. Rourke climbed higher, crossing the tree line and heading toward low hills rising out of the jungle. Below, the canopy stretched endlessly, broken only by rivers and scars of old bomb craters. This was the environment the Z-5 had been built for, vast, hostile, indifferent. He simulated a loss of power, easing the throttle back. The helicopter descended steadily, controllably. Auto-rotation characteristics were crude but forgiving. The rotor system carried inertia like a flywheel, buying time where modern designs relied on responsiveness. Again, endurance over elegance. As he brought the engine back up, he imagined the conditions under which North Vietnamese crews flew these machines. Night. No navigation aids. Limited training. Enemy fire. Bad weather. No recovery teams waiting if something went wrong. This helicopter did not ask much of its crew. It simply refused to quit. Rourke thought of American maintenance doctrine. Scheduled inspections. Precise tolerances. Components replaced long before failure. A system built around prevention. The Z-5 was built around acceptance. You flew it until it broke. Then you fixed what broke. Then you flew it again. He felt a chill unrelated to altitude. Turning back toward the airstrip, Rourke tested low-speed handling. The helicopter wallowed slightly, but remained controllable. Translational lift came late and left early. Everything about the Z-5 demanded anticipation. A pilot who reacted instead of planned would fall behind it quickly. But once ahead of it, the aircraft obeyed with unwavering loyalty. Approach and landing were an exercise in restraint. Too fast, and it would float, heavy and uncooperative. Too slow, and it sank with authority. The margin was narrow, but honest. Rourke set it down gently, skids kissing the earth with a firmness that felt appropriate. The rotor slowed gradually, the engine winding down with a tired growl. When the blades finally stopped, silence returned, broken only by distant insects and the ticking of cooling metal. He sat there for a long moment, hands resting on the controls. The Z-5 was not a good helicopter by American standards, but it was a truthful one. Ground crews approached cautiously. One mechanic looked up at him. "How was it, sir?" Rourke chose his words carefully. "It doesn't care if it's loved," he said. "It only cares if it's used." As he climbed out, he realized something unsettling. This helicopter had not been designed to dominate the battlefield. It had been designed to function when domination was impossible. And that, he suspected, was the reason it kept appearing in places American planners thought were unreachable. That afternoon, Rourke began his notes. Not performance charts. Not numbers. Observations. The Z-5 assumes the world is hostile, resources are limited, and mistakes are inevitable. It is not optimized for speed or precision. It is optimized for survival under neglect. He paused, pen hovering. If war was chaos, then this helicopter was fluent in it. The report took longer than expected. Rourke sat at a wooden desk inside a prefabricated command building, the hum of generators vibrating faintly through the floor. Outside, helicopters came and went, Hueys mostly, rising quickly, sharply, confident in their agility. Inside, the Z-5 sat silent under guard, already fading back into secrecy. He began, as doctrine required, with facts. Dimensions, lift capacity, engine output, cruise speed, range. On paper, the Harbin Z-5 was unimpressive. Inferior, even. Slower than the UH-1. Less responsive. Louder. Easier to detect. Vulnerable to ground fire. Everything American aviation training emphasized avoiding. And yet, the facts alone failed to explain its persistence. Rourke rewrote the opening twice before abandoning technical order entirely. Instead, he described behavior. The Z-5 does not encourage aggressive flying. It punishes impatience. It rewards anticipation. It remains controllable when damaged, uncomfortable at all times, and predictable under stress. That sentence stayed. He wrote about the engine, inefficient but tolerant of abuse. About the exposed systems, easy to damage, easier to repair. About the lack of redundancy that paradoxically made failures simpler to diagnose. Then he wrote the part that would never be briefed aloud. The Z-5 is not designed for superiority. It is designed for inevitability. He explained what he had begun to understand only after leaving the cockpit. American aircraft were designed around assumptions, air dominance, logistics, training pipelines, recovery options. They performed brilliantly when those assumptions held. The Z-5 assumed none of that. It assumed pilots would be tired, that mechanics would lack tools, that airfields would be temporary, that missions would be flown at the edge of endurance. And it assumed all of this from the first blueprint. Rourke paused, listening to rain strike the metal siding. Somewhere outside, a Huey spooled up, its turbine cutting cleanly through the air. He wondered how it would look 10 years from now. 20. Then he looked again at the Z-5 through the window, unglamorous, scarred, already obsolete by any modern standard. It would probably still be flying. When the report reached Saigon, the response was polite and brief. Intelligence officers thanked him. Technical analysts extracted numbers. Strategic planners skimmed the conclusions. No one argued with him. No one embraced the implications either. A week later, an Air Force colonel visiting from Pekoff read the report and shook his head. "You're saying they win by lowering standards," the colonel said. Rourke replied calmly. No, I'm saying they win by choosing standards that survive reality. The colonel smiled thinly. That's not how we build things. Rourke nodded. I know. The Z-5 was dismantled soon after. Crated. Shipped quietly to an evaluation facility far from the war. Its presence erased from daily operations. Another captured artifact filed away under classification. But the lesson lingered. Over the following months, reports from the field echoed his conclusions without using his language. Enemy helicopters continuing to operate from bombed-out clearings. Aircraft returning to service after damage that should have grounded them. Logistics flowing not efficiently, but persistently. Attrition did not always favor the more advanced machine. By 1971, Rourke had rotated out of Vietnam. Back in the United States, he lectured occasionally at aviation schools, careful with his words. He never mentioned the Z-5 by name. He didn't need to. He spoke instead about design humility, about building machines for failure, not perfection, about accepting that war strips systems down to what still works when everything else collapses. Some students listened. Others didn't. Years later, long after the war ended, Rourke visited an Army aviation museum. Rows of helicopters stood polished and restored, Hueys gleaming under soft lights. Attack helicopters bristling with sensors and weapons. In a far corner, almost overlooked, sat a large, dull transport helicopter. No plaque mentioning combat victories. No heroic framing. A Harbin Z-5. It bore the same blunt nose, the same thick glass, the same uncompromising shape. Visitors passed it without stopping. Rourke stood there for a long time. A young cadet eventually approached. Sir, was that thing any good? Rourke considered the question. It was never meant to be good, he said finally. It was meant to be there. The cadet frowned, unsure what that meant, then moved on. Rourke stayed. He thought of the morning he first lifted it into the air, of the heavy controls, the vibration, the sense that the aircraft neither trusted nor distrusted him. It simply expected him to cope. That was its secret. The Z-5 did not promise victory. It promised continuation. And in wars defined not by decisive moments, but by exhaustion, continuation mattered more than brilliance. As Rourke turned away, he remembered a line he had almost included in his original report, then crossed out as too philosophical. In the end, the most dangerous machine is not the one that performs best on its first day, but the one that still works on its worst. He smiled faintly. The Z-5 had never tried to be admired. It had only tried to endure. And it succeeded.